I sat through Christmas dinner at a table meant for 6, with 5 empty chairs staring back at me. Not because I craved solitude, but because the 3 children I carried and raised had quietly erased me from the family. But that night, an unexpected guest arrived, bringing with him undeniable proof of ruthless betrayal, and a plan my husband had put in place before he passed. From that moment on, I was no longer the discarded mother. I became the last woman they should have ever crossed. My name is Margaret Fisher. I'm 67 years old, and 6 months ago, I buried the man I thought I'd grow old with, Arthur, my husband of 42 years. He wasn't just my partner in life. He was the glue that held our family together. Arthur loved Christmas like no one else. Not for the gifts or the songs or the snow, but for what it represented: family, warmth, unity. So when December came around, I did something bold, maybe even foolish. I decided to host a Christmas dinner. Not at home, but at Bravemont, a quiet, elegant restaurant tucked away in the hills. It was where Arthur once took me on our 30th anniversary. I reserved a table for 6. I wanted to do it right, to honor his memory in a way that might bring us back together. I planned everything down to the last detail. I asked the chef to prepare Peter's favorite duck confit, Rachel's butternut squash ravioli, and Daniel's obsession, creme brulee with cinnamon. I even arranged to have Arthur's favorite jazz record playing softly in the background. Every element was chosen with care, not to impress them, but to remind them of who we were, of who we used to be. But the calls started coming in, one by one. First, Rachel. Mom, something came up with the kids. Alex has a fever, and Ben's car broke down. I really wish I could be there. Her voice was smooth, apologetic, but practiced. Too polished. Then Peter. Sorry, Mom, work's been insane. I just got pulled into a last-minute client dinner. You know how it is during the holidays. And finally, Daniel. Hey, I completely forgot I committed to a Christmas concert with Julie's parents. We'll visit next week, okay? 3 different excuses, 3 different tones, but all delivered within a span of 20 minutes, all just hours before the dinner. That's when something inside me twisted. Because the reasons, they sounded different, yes, but they shared the same heartbeat. They weren't coincidences. Not this time. It was too clean, too coordinated. And in that silence that followed, as I stood in the hallway staring at my coat draped over the chair, I realized something that I had refused to admit for too long. My children hadn't grown distant by accident. They were retreating, deliberately, methodically. And tonight, they didn't just cancel a dinner. They canceled me. But I still went to that dinner. Alone. I sat at that table set for 6, with 5 empty chairs staring at me like ghosts. And I told myself, Arthur would have shown up for me. I didn't know it yet, but that night, someone else would show up too. Someone who would turn the entire story upside down. I sat there, staring into the dim candlelight that danced across 5 untouched place settings. Laughter echoed from other tables around me, families clinking glasses, children giggling, couples stealing kisses. And I sat in the middle of it all, alone. A mother erased. A widow clinging to tradition like a life raft. I was halfway through a glass of wine I didn't even taste when I saw him. Ethan. My grandson, or so I had always believed. He walked in alone, glancing around nervously, until his eyes met mine. For a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, someone had remembered. That maybe he'd come to keep me company out of love. He sat down slowly across from me, his face tight with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Fear. Then, without a word, he placed 2 things on the table. One was a manila envelope. The other, a printed document with a familiar header. A copy of Arthur's will. My breath caught. I reached out, my fingers trembling, heart pounding. I think you deserve to know the truth, Ethan said quietly. They're reading the will right now, at Albrecht's. A private room. No one invited you. His words sliced through me sharper than any blade. I opened the will. My name wasn't there. Not in the main notification group. Not in the attendees. My heart slammed against my ribs. It didn't make sense until I opened the second envelope. Inside was a paternity test, a DNA analysis. The result: Ethan wasn't my biological grandson. He was adopted by Rachel years ago. Lied to. Lied about. She had kept this secret from all of us. Claimed she was a single mother after a college fling. We rallied around her. Arthur, he treated Ethan like his own. And so did I. But here was the truth, spelled out in sterile black ink. She told everyone you were growing senile, Ethan whispered, avoiding my gaze. Said you weren't fit to manage anything. That you'd crumble without Grandpa. They were trying to have you declared incompetent, so they could divide the estate. I felt nauseous, not from the wine, not from the grief, but from the weight of betrayal, of years spent loving unconditionally, only to be turned into a stepping stone for greed. And then Ethan said something that froze my blood. Grandpa knew. He found out everything before he died. He had a plan. A plan. Arthur had known. My Arthur, the man who whispered Christmas carols to me in bed and wrote love notes in the margins of cookbooks, had seen this coming? I looked at Ethan, truly looked at him, and I realized he was afraid, not just of what he'd said, but of what I might do now that I knew. Everything changed in that moment, because they thought they buried a grieving widow. But they had just awakened something far more dangerous. The next morning, I didn't wake up as the same woman who cried over 5 empty chairs. I woke up as someone with a mission. Ethan and I drove in silence to the law office of Mr. Slater, Arthur's old attorney and trusted friend. I had only met the man once years ago, when Arthur handled some land paperwork. But as soon as I stepped into his office, he stood with a grim smile that held too much knowing. I was told, he said softly, that if you ever walked in with red eyes and a steel spine, I'd know what time it was. He reached under his desk and pulled out a locked metal box. This is from Arthur, sealed 3 months before he passed. He told me, Margaret won't ask for this until they push her too far. But when she does, give her everything. I took the box with both hands. My fingers hesitated at the latch, but my heart didn't. Inside were files, dozens of them, neatly labeled. Photos, handwritten notes, transcripts, even audio recordings, evidence, every visit, every conversation, every whispered plan that Rachel, Peter, and Daniel had ever uttered behind my back. They'd met with realtors to quietly assess the lake house in Vermont. They had consulted care facilities, discussed power of attorney, and debated which one of them would handle me once I lost mental clarity. Get her in a home, sell the properties, liquidate the accounts, Peter had said in one recording. She'll be so deep in grief, she won't notice a thing. I noticed. Arthur had noticed too. He had hired a private investigator. He had installed recording devices in the cabin. He'd even intercepted emails and logged calls. Not because he was paranoid, but because he saw the cracks in their smiles long before I did. Then, tucked neatly in a Navy folder, was a revised copy of his will. Unlike the version read at Albrecht's, this one had my name all over it. Arthur had funneled his assets into a trust, one that bore my name as sole trustee. The clause that chilled me most was the one he highlighted in yellow. In the event that Margaret's mental faculties are questioned, the trust is to be frozen indefinitely. No beneficiary shall receive a cent until she is cleared by a licensed evaluator of her own choosing. He knew what they'd try, and he built armor around me. At the bottom of the box was a single envelope, hand-labeled in Arthur's unmistakable scrawl. For when you're ready to fight. Inside was just one line: "They can't steal you if you choose to stand." In that moment, I wasn't just Arthur's widow anymore. I was the keeper of his legacy, and I was done playing the quiet victim. I didn't storm into their lives screaming with betrayal. That would have been too easy, and too satisfying, for them. No, I chose a path Arthur would have admired: calculated, elegant, and utterly unforgiving. I asked Ethan to send out invitations for a second family Christmas dinner, this time hosted at my home, the same place they once planned to sell behind my back. The invitations were handwritten, sincere, even warm. I wanted them to believe I was still the same weak, grieving mother desperate for unity. But the dinner table this time looked different. Instead of candles and cranberry sauce, there were folders at each seat. Instead of Christmas music, there was silence thick enough to choke on. When Rachel, Peter, and Daniel arrived, their faces wore rehearsed warmth. Rachel even brought a bottle of wine, pretending as if the last dinner, and the betrayal, never happened. I smiled politely, motioned for them to sit. And then Mr. Slater emerged from the hallway, accompanied by 3 quiet, observant men, retired federal investigators Arthur had once worked with during a corporate dispute years ago. They now stood behind Slater like silent judges. "Before we eat," I said calmly, "I'd like to share a few memories." Slater passed out the evidence. First, the audio recordings, Rachel's voice, cold and calculating. Once she's in a facility, the trust becomes contestable. All we need is one signed affidavit. Peter's email chains with Daniel, coordinating how to manipulate my medical history. Transfers of money from Arthur's emergency fund into Daniel's crypto account, disguised as legal services. And then the final blow: an official letter from Lakeside Mental Health Facility, confirming that all 3 of my children had submitted forged documents requesting an involuntary psychiatric evaluation for me. They had tried to declare me legally incompetent, without my knowledge. I watched their faces morph. Peter's cocky smirk evaporated. Daniel's legs began to jitter under the table. Rachel's hands shook as she reached for the wine, only to find her glass had been taken away. "I didn't invite you here for dinner," I said, my voice steady. "I invited you to say goodbye." Their mouths opened, but no sound came out. I stood up, walked to the side table, took out a final document. "This," I continued, holding up the notarized papers, "is a directive to freeze all assets under the Fisher Trust. Effective immediately. No disbursements. No access. No exceptions." Daniel lunged forward. "You can't do that." "I just did." Slater nodded and passed them copies. "Only one beneficiary remains: Ethan Fisher. He is now sole heir and co-executor." Peter shouted. Rachel cried. Daniel swore. But none of it mattered. I had handed them everything for decades: my love, my loyalty, my trust. Now I was handing them nothing, and that was the beginning of my peace. Rachel sobbed uncontrollably, mascara trailing down her face like guilt trying to escape. Peter slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "You're insane, Mother!" Daniel stayed silent, but I saw it in his eyes, the slow crumble of pride, the realization that I wasn't the weak old woman he thought he could manipulate. I didn't respond to their outbursts. I didn't need to. The silence in the room spoke louder than any accusation I could have made. I had laid bare the truth, and now they had to live with it. They stormed out one by one. No apologies, just rage, denial, and bruised egos. But I wasn't seeking apologies anymore. A month later, I packed the last of my things and left the house where I'd spent nearly my entire adult life. It was never really a home. It had been a battlefield I hadn't known I was on until it was nearly too late. Ethan and I moved into Arthur's dream, a quiet house by the lake in upstate Vermont. He used to talk about it every winter, how peaceful it would be to sip tea on the porch while snow dusted the water's edge. I never thought I'd live there without him. But now every room echoed with his foresight, every window framed a view he once imagined for me. We built a guest house beside the main home, Ethan's idea. This way I'm always nearby, he said. But you still get your peace. That boy. No, that man. He may not be my blood, but his heart is more mine than any of my children's ever were. Not once did he ask for $1. Not once did he use our bond as leverage. He stayed because he chose me. One evening, as we sat by the frozen lake under a velvet sky scattered with stars, Ethan said softly, "You know, Grandma, I don't think I've ever had a real family until now." I looked at him, tears warming the cold in my eyes. "Blood doesn't make family," I said. "Love does. Loyalty does. Choosing each other, that's what makes us family." In the weeks that followed, I began donating to local charities under my name, per Arthur's instructions. $200,000 to fund shelters, food banks, and scholarships. His final gift wasn't just money. It was dignity. It was the reminder that justice doesn't always arrive on a silver horse. It arrives when you refuse to be ridden. I'm no longer the woman who begged for love at a table full of ghosts. I'm the woman who lit the match and walked away from the ashes. And this time, I'm not looking back. Never underestimate a mother who has been betrayed. She may break. She may weep. But when she rises, she will make the whole world pay attention. If this story touched you, share it. Because family isn't measured in blood, but in truth, loyalty, and who stays when everything falls apart. And if you've ever been used, discarded, or pushed aside, remember this: you deserve respect. You have the power to rewrite your ending. You are not weak for being hurt. You're powerful for surviving it. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell to never miss another gripping revenge story from Revenge with Alex.